Explanations about the overall consciousness block by Christian Frehner, Switzerland. Profoundly edited by Billy.
Several people from the English-speaking world have contacted me and pointed out a contradiction they had discovered when reading Billy's books. The trigger was a statement in the book about the Fluidal-Powers, in which from page 146 the following can be read.
According to the creational law principle regarding the birth of a life form, it is given that a personality, respectively an individuum, is not capable of reincarnation, but rather that this is limited to the spirit form and to the overall consciousness block.
They saw this statement as contradictory to the information given below, namely, on the one hand, in the book Diversicum, where it says on page 301.
In the planetary realm of the other world there is also the overall consciousness block, which always remains in the other world and which creates the individual consciousness blocks.
And on the other hand, two passages in the book Rebirth, Life, Dying, Death and Sorrow, namely on page 6.
A block is therefore a grouping or group. Consequently, an overall consciousness block is a group of consciousness/personality functions or programs, such as consciousness/personality, subconsciousness, unconsciousness forms, and whatever else appertaining to it, in order to direct the human being as a human being. Before the spirit form and the consciousness block with the personality find entry on the 21st day after the conception of a new human being, page 118 it said, the embryo is merely like a plant, kept alive by the electromagnetic life energy. With the entry of the spirit form and the new personality of the overall consciousness block, created by its neutral energy that changes itself immediately.
And further on page 118.
The process of the entry of the personality of the consciousness block and the spirit form takes place exactly on the 21st day after the procreation of a new human being by physical human parents, or through an artificial insemination manipulation, or an artificial procreation, or through a cloning.
Regarding the terms overall consciousness block and consciousness block used in this book, it should be added that several clarifications were subsequently published in a core agenda brochure. Concretely, it is about the statement that one overall consciousness block, or consciousness block, on the one hand, is given to the human being, which after his or her death remains so long in the realm of the other world, respectively in the corresponding creation realm of the death plane, in order to reincarnate on the 21st day after conception into the newly born human being as an intact overall consciousness block, to whom, however, also exists an overall consciousness block in the creation energy realm as a creational counterpart, which naturally at all times remains there, but which can be used informatively by the overall consciousness block of the human being for the evolution. This, however, is to be learned in its function, not in a spiritual teaching-wise, respectively creation energy-wise, but rather is absolutely irrelevant in this respect. Now, the assumption that it is only an apparent contradiction, as already earlier at different times explanations occurred of other aspects of the teaching of truth, teaching of creation energy, teaching of life, turned out to be justified. Part explanations should not and should never be learned and, consequently, also not be asked for, because they are and remain only part explanations, in order to mention where the whole in its origin actually comes from. Origin factors, however, are not to be learned and investigated, and indeed, in no kind and wise, because solely the teaching of the creation energy and its application is of significance in order to evolve in a consciousness-based manner, and above all ethically, in order to become a true human being. In the process it is important that this is learned, therefore not the connections of how everything comes into being through the creation realm outside of what is important to learn regarding the ethically right behavior and the therefrom resulting being human in the real and true sense. How the origin of the whole, and how its function and developmental process from the ground up out of the energy and its activity develops, is neither relevant, nor can it be explained in short form. To really understand this in such a manner that it can be comprehensively understood, requires a separate course of instruction that solely refers to these aspects and deals very intensively and profoundly with this special material. After clarification of the exact facts, the following situation presents itself. The term overall consciousness block is used for the purely creation energetic block of the human being, which is constantly present in him or her as part of the creation energy, as an all-knowing factor of everything which is learned in all lives. Consequently, it forms the human overall consciousness block, which together with the spirit form, respectively, creation energy form, enters into the embryo on the 21st day after conception and begins to be active. This overall consciousness block creates the initially empty consciousness block, which is successively filled by the human being during his or her life with what he or she has learned, which corresponds to what he or she has evolutively learned, and which after the death empties itself, so to speak, into the human overall consciousness block, dissolves again and neutralizes again in the death realm, respectively, the realm of the other world, and then the overall consciousness block creates a new consciousness which in turn must evolve itself in the life of the human being. The creation energetic overall consciousness block is, on the one hand, thus given to the human being, whereas on the other hand, however, also an overall consciousness block of the creation itself is given, in which everything is stored that exists somewhere in the creation realm, so to speak, that crawls, flies, walks, lies, sleeps, jumps, comes into being and is or becomes otherwise active in some form in a consciousness-based manner. However, since both overall consciousness blocks are connected with each other in an impulse-based manner, the human being, during his or her life, can also draw information from the creational overall consciousness block and use it for his or her consciousness-based evolution. The so-called storage banks are at the same time also involved and contribute their part to the entire process of the anungona memory inspiration becoming aware learning complex, therefore to human individual consciousness-based evolution. Explained is that, according to the still inadequate evolution state of the earthly human being, it is not permitted to elucidate or to teach him or her all consciousness-related aspects and terms down to their finest ramifications, on the one hand, because he or she does not or cannot understand them, and on the other hand, because too many details of the connections of the whole are confusing the human being, leading him or her onto false thought paths and, as a rule, bring him or her no direct consciousness-based benefit with regard to the evolution anyway. Instead of concerning oneself in depth with concepts of the primeval origin of overall consciousness block and consciousness block, the human being would do better to learn to think rightly and to live according to the creational natural laws and recommendations. This requires that the values of the character are rightly formed according to the ethics, and the behaviors are whipped into shape in this high form, which are then to be brought to bear accordingly in life. What is taught with the teaching, the terms that are used, and so on, such as those in the book Sprung aller Existenz, equals an extract from the book De Versicum, is meant for the human beings far into the future, because truthfully the present-day human being of Earth can practically do nothing concrete with it yet. It is not making oneself important with concepts such as absolute nothing space or nihilospaces or infinite duration, and so on, that distinguishes the human being as such, but rather what he or she does ethically right and what he or she learns from his or her life, namely to be a good human being who cares for himself or herself, for the fellow human beings, for all ecosystems, and consequently also for the far-reaching whole of nature with its flora and fauna, for the atmosphere and for the climate. It is therefore not sensible, indeed practically impossible, to explain all terms down to the last detail, but rather, it is important that the human being rightly does what he or she makes and does, how he or she puts into practice and brings to fruition his or her ethical values, and how he or she lives out his or her behaviors. The human beings who read what is explained in the books, study the teaching, and follow these should not get stuck on the individual terms. On the contrary, they should recognize the sense, make the necessary ethics from it for the kind and wise of behavior, and accordingly develop their lives, therefore evolve in a consciousness-based manner. In this tool, the human being learns to calculate, write and read, but what is done with it and out of it results individually according to effort and interest, and so on. Ethics, for example, are not learned through this tool, or rudimentarily at most, but rather must be worked out personally and individually. Ethics also do not develop by themselves, purely through the reading of books, or through a few stories told, and so on, but rather through analysis of cause and effect in the everyday life, through constant observation of the inner and outer processes, thoughts, feelings, emotions, seeing, living experience and hearing, and the drawing of the right conclusions. What is further to say about the term overall consciousness block with the limited thinking of Earth humans? This term is at most to be understood in analogies, but cannot be consciously logically followable. This block reaches into the creation realm, which, for the human beings of Earth with their present consciousness-based evolution state, will not be ascertainable for a long time yet, if ever. This applies especially also for the specified scheme of the interactions between the different consciousness forms in the book Diversicum on page 301. It may be interesting to mentally occupy oneself with the scheme. However, if one then tries to transfer this concretely to the processes in one's own brain, then the human being is at a complete loss as to what to do. Instead of pondering about the spiritual, respectively, the creation energy-based conditioned consciousness in order to thereby gain supposedly important cognitions, supposedly, because the high fine fluidal realm exceeds the limited material capability of thinking of the human being for the time being, it is, as said, recommendable to concern oneself in the day-to-day life with the possible consciousness-based evolution or threatening stagnation. A conclusion not only with regard to the term overall consciousness block, but also with regard to many further terms in the mental realm. The human being is currently only scratching the surface and has no idea which aspects and significances, and so on, will remain hidden from him or her still for a long time. It is for this reason sensible that he or she practice modesty and, as a current kindergartner, not to try to shine with citations of knowledge taught at university level. A stable consciousness-based evolution occurs step by step, and not by means of falsely hoped for shortcuts and things that always remain illusory, and which in the end are not grasped in their real connections and remain useless for the personal, ethical and general good and rightly being human in the real and true sense evolution.
Translated by Michael Eiterbrook, Jan. 7, 2022, Tinney, Ontario. Corrected by Jan 12, 2022.